With Earthwatch since 1998, and was just saying about how much he had enjoyed in the past. We always used to have a PI conference, which was just down the river here, or actually moved around a little bit, where everyone always used to get together, and the scientists could get to meet staff, scientists could meet each other, volunteers could meet staff and PIs, and it was really something pretty special. And for the last few years, we haven't had one. It's something that we're thinking about. How can we get one back because of the power of that? But anyhow, so this is, Luke saw a great opportunity for coming up here, and we're very thankful for him and his team to be able to come up. One of the things I did want to acknowledge, and as I've been thinking about it and meeting other scientists recently, is that there's really what I consider is like a generation of what I call super PIs, and Luke is one of them that started but between 97, 98, that came to Earthwatch early on, and really there was a great synergy between the Earthwatch model and the scientists early on being able to do something special. And the other ones are Jay Nichols, Luke, Lee Dyer is another one that we still have that are really sort of special in that way. So we're very happy that you could make it here and do that. But anyhow, that's a good story.
Appreciate it. Well, just to further expand on that a little bit, in '98, when Earthwatch sort of agreed to sponsor and take on collaboratively develop the Carnivores of Madagascar project, I was 23 or 24 at the time, and Earthwatch really took a chance. And everything that you're going to see over the next few minutes is a direct result of that mutual commitment and investment that Earthwatch made early on, and none of this, and I mean none of what you see here, would have been possible or would exist were it not for that early and long-standing relationship with Earthwatch. So at the end of this, I want each and every one of you to understand that what you do on a day-to-day basis and have done for well over a decade now is the reason that everything you're about to see happens. And so this is a gratitude talk as much as it is anything else in terms of information transfer. There's so many new faces, so I hope you get excited about this. Little introduction to Madagascar first. Madagascar has definitely been called the world's top biodiversity conservation priority. But let's talk a little bit about why. If you know anything about the country, you know it's got lemurs. All the species of lemurs, now they list about 150 of them or so, are endemic to Madagascar. They're found on Madagascar and not anywhere else. So that's a very high rate of endemism. Madagascar is most famous for the lemurs. It's also famous for its reptiles and amphibians. Like the chameleon you see here, 93% or so of all herps are endemic to Madagascar that are found on Madagascar. More than half the birds, these amazingly cursorial creatures, more than half the birds you find on Madagascar are endemic. Well over 80% of all the mammals as well. So that high rate of endemism, the uniqueness of the species you find there, because the island's been where it is for 100+ million years or more. So what is there hasn't had the same pressures that the rest of the country has, or that the rest of the world has, in terms of fauna being competed with and invaded, and you see lots of turnover. And there's an additional issue. Madagascar is one of the most recently colonized islands in the world as well. People arrived in Madagascar between 0 and 500 AD, something like that. So very recently colonized. When I first started working in Madagascar, there were 12 million people on this island that's about the size of California and Oregon put together. It's the world's 4th largest island. That was 12 million in '94. This year, there are 22 million people on Madagascar. It's a huge population growth rate. About a quarter of the people live in urban environments. About 3/4 live in rural environments. And the vast majority of the rural people in Madagascar are subsistence farmers. They grow rice to eat, to survive. One can't blame them for doing that, but one also has to recognize the impacts of that kind of population explosion combined with people who have got to eat. This picture on the right you see here was from Science, published in the mid-'80s, that showed the level of deforestation that had been mapped for Madagascar's east coasts. And at the time, it was thought there was only about 10% of the original extent of the habitat remaining. Now it's less than 7% of the original extent of Madagascar's habitats remaining, particularly when you consider the rainforests here on the east coast the dry forests here on the west coast where we were, and then the spiny forests down here. It used to be that essentially just right here on the highest plateau wasn't forested. Now you have to really hunt and mean it to find forested areas in the country. Now, what happens when people need to eat? They clear forested habitats. They do slash and burn agriculture. They convert it for rice growing. This is the only choice they really have. So what used to be forest becomes rice field. The topsoils are not very rich in general throughout the country. And in addition, these hard rains come down. Eventually, what you'll see in just a short period of time after conversion of a forest to rice field is, within probably a couple of decades, no more, what was forest looks like savanna, and it really doesn't have enough topsoil to regenerate. Because what happens is during the rainy seasons, the rain comes down very hard, hits that topsoil, washes it downstream, out rivers, and this is in Carnivores where we were here, but if you look at a satellite image of Madagascar during the rainy season, it really looks like the island is hemorrhaging its lifeblood into the Mozambique Channel or the Indian Ocean. That's the iron-rich topsoil that washes away. So once you lose that coverage, it's very hard to regenerate. It's not a matter of just planting more trees if there's no soil strata to deal with. Eventually, this beautiful view that we see almost every day when we're out checking traps and walk up on the savanna, this is probably a mile from where I'm standing to this point here. That's an erosion gully that's come up in a few decades. It's actually causing additional deforestation by having the substrata eroded out from under the soil that's there. So that initial conversion is a critical point in what's going to happen to the future of the forest. I didn't know any of this when I went to Madagascar for the first time in 1994. Summer after my junior year in college, I worked at the Duke Lemur Center for a while, and I'd talked somebody into taking me on the lemur project. And I was going to be their field assistant. And so I was running around chasing this lemur, collecting data on what it was eating, how many chews per mouthful, all sorts of things. Literally, I'm not kidding. And the lemur that I was tasked with following disappeared. It's my first time in the field. I've lost the lemur. Can't find it. Great. My career's over before it began. A few weeks later, we found the remains of that animal. There's a whole other story there I'll tell you later over beers. But we found the remains of that animal, and our guide said, a fusa got it. This guy his name was Pierre. He was a former hunter. He was never lost. He knew every species of everything. He completely blanched, and he wanted to go home. We were several hours hike from getting out of the park, and he wanted to leave right there. Had he done so, we would still be there because we had no idea where we were. And my original question, after he said a fusa got it and he wanted to leave, was, what's a fusa? I'd never heard that word before, but to see his expression, I thought, I've come to a place on the other side of the planet, not aware that there's something like a tiger that's about to come bounding out from the underbrush and devour us all. And I couldn't get any more information from other than, oh, it's Masiakabe, which is, very bloodthirsty and vicious and mean. That's what a fusa looks like. I didn't see one in 1994, but my curiosity was piqued, and I couldn't get any more information in the field. Came back to the States and hit the libraries, and pretty much couldn't find anything else either. And so in '96, I went back to Madagascar to start studying fusa in that same forest where we'd lost them that first time. And quickly learned that A, you got to be very lucky to catch fusa, and we were in '96 there. We caught 2 of them. And B, it takes a lot of effort. You have to put traps over a long area, long trail. It's hard to find, and to have 1, 2, or 3 people trying to do just that wears you thin. And if you're going to do that as 1, 2, or 3 people, your career's going to be very short because you're going to go find something else that's easier to do. So, in 1997, I met a man named Peter Tyson, who was with communications and PR with Earthwatch, and started talking to him about Earthwatch, and said, I think I'll apply for that. And in '98, Earthwatch signed on, and in '99, fielded the first Earthwatch team in Carnivores National Park in the northwest of Madagascar. The idea at the time was to learn as much as we could about fusa, its natural history, how many there were, what it ate, how big its range was, all of these things. And this shiny, fresh team of Earthwatch volunteers from 1999 there, even me slightly thinner and definitely clean shaven, had success that year. We ran 5 teams back to back. And from that seminal period, all of what I'm about to tell you about developed. I'm going to show you a few videos, time willing, and give you an idea in motion about some of the things that Earthwatch teams do when they're in the field with us. And let's just watch this really quick. Is it too loud?
I'm Luke Dollar.
Okay.
For about 17 years, I've been coming to Madagascar, a country biologists like myself like to think of as a petri dish of evolutionary history. It's so unique that 4 out of 5 organisms you find here, you won't find anywhere else. One of the most elusive is the fusa, which I study.
Fusa what? What's the number? Fusa
G6.
That's my co-PI, Julie Pomerantz, who was an Earthwatch volunteer in
I didn't come to
1999.
Madagascar to study the fusa. I came for the reason that most people come to Madagascar, the lemurs. Lemurs are the famous icons of this island. And I was studying a particular lemur, and then this lemur ups and disappears. Turns out that this lemur had been eaten by this predator I'd never heard of before, the fusa. I think it's a female. Fusa is the largest carnivore on Madagascar. It's the top predator. It's the natural king of the jungle. What I'm going to be aiming for is the fleshy part of its thigh. Got it. Right now, we wait for about 60 seconds. If I had to imagine what the common ancestor between the mongooses, the cats, and the hyenas looked like way back when, I imagine it would look a lot like a fusa. She scratched up her face a little bit, but there's just light abrasions. Throughout the island, I estimate that there's definitely fewer than 3,000 fusa left in the wild. And so I spend half, probably more, of my
Earthwatch
time
t-shirt, go
working with
Brandon.
conservation of the species. Because not doing so would guarantee that by the end of my career, I'm going to have a whole trove of information about a recently extinct species.
Madagascar is in a conservation conundrum. It's between human survival and the preservation of natural resources, and we're trying to strike a balance between those things so that both the forests and the wildlife, as well as the human communities, can coexist sustainably for the indefinite future. Madagascar is famous for its lemurs, but it's also pretty famous for its chameleons. You'll notice this guy's eyes, they move independently. There's a lot of folklore that comes from the fact that a chameleon can look forwards and backwards at the same time that make them pretty special animals to the local people as well. We're going to save this guy from being roadkill and drop him off over where he was headed anyway. That was our good deed for the morning. Everybody around me you see here, by and large, is a subsistence farmer. They need water in order to grow crops. If they don't grow crops, they don't eat. The forests are the key. They're the sponge to the water. Without the forest, the watershed, and the water that slowly irrigates the fields even during the dry season, there is no rice. If there's no rice, there's no food. If there's no food, there's no survival.
Hyacinths are choking off that vital water supply at Lake Ravilobe in Nkarafanska National Park.
2 years ago, this lake was completely open. There were no hyacinths on this lake. Last year when we got here, we were shocked to see all of this.
This hyacinth is not a natural species to this lake. This is an invasive plant. We're taking a pretty simple brute force approach to the issue. We're pulling them out. Truly mammoth job, it's an enormous job. But that's what's necessary to take this lake back to its natural state. So that's what we're doing.
We probably won't get every hyacinth plant on the lake, but if we can bring them to a controllable number, then we've succeeded. But there is one good thing.
This cow is loving this hyacinth. It's succulent. It's great to eat. And he wants to keep it. He thought it was worth defending. That means that this is worth something to him.
When I come back here next year, there'll probably be another new project dealing with another issue of conservation in Madagascar.
With each individual project, it's all about the same thing. And that's keeping what's here, here. Animals, plants, people. If we lose any part of it, we're going to lose all of it. And we can't let that happen.
All right, so a little bit melodramatic, but shows you a lot of the things that are going on. And what I want to do over the next few minutes is to walk you guys through everything that we're doing on a daily basis when we're over there. And every aspect of this is involving Earthwatch volunteers, and they're participating in it. Their first day in the field, Earthwatch volunteers are helping us set up our traps, make sure they're all functioning, there's no sharp edges or anything like that, making sure our inventory is good, and putting them out in the field on the established trap lines that we've been using for a while. This is first done in the campsite where we're checking them all. You can see here we just went to all solar this past year, so we have solar panels that we're using as opposed to the generator, and I'd forgotten how wonderful it sounds at night without going until 9 p.m. So that's fantastic. But so going out and putting all these traps out, and so at the end of the first day, hopefully they have found their physical limits, because that's my goal, because once they know where they are, everything else for the rest of the team period is self-selected each day. The Earthwatch volunteers figure out what it is they want to do. Hopefully they found their limits very early on, and so people who want to hike, get lots of opportunity to do that. Twice a day, morning and night, we're checking 2 different trap lines that we have. And each trap check is also an ecological census, figuring out everything that's in the forest, building a long-term biodiversity database for the park management, but also giving us an idea of what are the prey items that FUSA may be eating. Now, we've learned that, and we didn't know this early on, FUSA eat just about everything with a heartbeat. We found that by collecting scats, which these teams are also doing as they're going through and picking up the scats, and then we go through them later and identify by tiny little bone fragments what the prey species were. Hopefully, they're going to find FUSA in traps, but they're doing these census walks and the trap checks twice a day on 2 different trap lines. If we catch a FUSA, somebody gets on the horn and usually calls us on a sat phone, and the project veterinarian and I, my co-PI, Julie Pomerantz, Earthwatch volunteer from 1999, go out to the site and we dart it like you saw in the video there. We bring it back to camp, to a central processing area, where we do absolutely everything we possibly can before the anesthesia wears off. We take anatomical measurements if it's one we've captured before. We have a comparison from year to year. We check on the health of the animal, how it looks overall. The vet is supervising this the whole time. I feel very strongly about that. And we're taking blood and tissue samples for health and genetics work. We're putting ear tags in. If it's a new animal, we're checking the ear tags to make sure they're still in place. If it's an animal we've caught before, if the ear tags have come out, we thought of this already. We have microchipped them, and we'll microchip them if it's a new animal as well. So we actually, the same thing you take from the vet's office when you take your pet to be chipped, we chip them in the field. Then if we get done in time and it's still out, there's time for some hero shots there too. Volunteers really, really like that. I always make them put their Earthwatch t-shirts on. This is, you can see Zawabana here working with the veterinary workup of the animal while it's it's still under doing the health assessment, looking for endoparasites, ectoparasites as well. Zwabana, who's here, is here in the States for 2 months. She first came to the project as an Earthwatch volunteer 4 years ago. She's from Madagascar. She finishes vet school this year, and has, since she's been here, been to North Carolina, New York, San Diego, the Lemur Center, my wife's vet clinic in Charlotte, 2 different clinics in New York, the Cornell Lab, and she leaves Sunday headed to Pete Belaski's veterinary clinic in Davie, Florida, who is another Earthwatch volunteer that I'll tell you about over time. And oftentimes we'll have vet techs and things like that that come as volunteers, and they certainly are able to help out. And then we put the animal in a recovery cage. When it's fully recovered, we release it at its trap site, and then more work begins. So we've got the twice-a-day trap checks going on, processing any animals we catch. We're also doing ground truthing for habitat status. When I first started working in Carnivores here, at the time it was the largest dry forest protected area in Madagascar, and I wanted to know what the overall habitat looked like. So I got satellite images from Landsat from about 1990, and then 2000. We just got to 2000, and just did an assessment of forest change inside the park borders over that decade. Now, a very famous NGO had a more than $1 million a year budget to do forest management in Carnivores over that decade, and they lost 22% of the forest covered during that time. This was not a popular result when this came out and it got communicated around. But regardless of whether the management that had been there and had obviously been sleeping on the job liked it, the Malagasy government stood up and listened. The NGO was kicked out of the park, and the Malagasy government took over the management of its own park early in the time period, and I think it's been doing a very good job since. I'll tell you a little bit more about this later, because you'll see some follow-up from this. The nice thing about a long-term project and this consistent long-term commitment from Earthwatch is we can actually see the long-term benefits of what we've been doing, as well as the year-to-year or intra-year short-term things. Now, some of what was driving that deforestation was illegal logging for products like the Gibson guitar frets that I got to testify before Congress last year, to give a congressional briefing to say what the impacts from the Madagascar side of this stuff coming out of the country was for Gibson. I don't think I had anything to do with this, but Gibson settled it like 2 weeks later. So, yay! 1-1 for the team. But essentially, this picture is from Carnivores. This is a palisandre, a rosewood tree, with a crested drongo sitting on it. We see probably 3 to 4 dozen different species of birds, and not always the same birds from day to day. Every day, we see multiple species of lemur every day. This is their habitat, and we've been able to quantify the long-term trends in not only Fusa, but a lot of the prey populations as well. But the reason this was happening is because, frankly, the local people, and there are 10,000 people that live in the greater Carnivores area, didn't have an economy. They had slash-and-burn agriculture. That was what they did to survive. And the only other thing that they were really doing was selling either these sauces made from mangoes or lemons, or what you see here wrapped up in these banana leaves, which is called Rambo, as in Sylvester Stallone Rambo. And it's a little bit of ethnobotany there, the Malagasy equivalent of Viagra. Don't know if it works or not, but people sure do buy a lot of it along the sides of the road. But that was the only really marketable thing that they had in this immediate area near where we were working. We were walking back from trap checks one day, and this was in 1999, the first year we had Earthwatch teams there. And the local women were shelling the rice in this old handmade massive mortar and pestle. And they were singing beautiful songs to maintain their tempo. And the sound of the striking of the rice was actually keeping the tempo like a metronome. And we just stopped and listened. And it was captivating. And so in 1999 we said, Vazas, that's foreigners like us, would pay a lot of money to hear you do this. At the time in Carnivores had low, a few thousand tourists per year total from anywhere. But that was still a lot of people coming through by local standards. And they said, really? And we said, yeah, they would. You got to understand, there's no electricity, there's no radio, there's no TV, there's no plumbing. a lot of the history is oral, a lot of it is transmitted via songs. A lot of folklore type things that are transmitted and translated in song. And we had a folklore dance at the end of each Earthwatch team, at the end of those 5 Earthwatch teams in 1999. And it's traditional when they do sort of an entertainment thing like that, they'll put a lamba, which is like a sarong. It's a traditional garment. It's exactly like a sarong. And it's participatory, so everybody in the audience isn't just sitting there. They're taking part, and they put gifts in, usually monetary gifts, in the lamba. The women's group saved the money they made from 1999 to 2000. And when we got back there in 2000, our second year of running Earthwatch teams there, they said, "We saved the money. Will you help us build a campsite in our village? So when people come here, they can stay here and we can make money." We said yes. So by 2001, Mbudi Manga Campsite had been created, and since that time, these guys have perfected the care and husbandry of vazas in the campsite. They have started with about a dozen now, 3 dozen covered tent sites. They have guards. We don't need the guards because there's no violence, but it makes everybody feel better. And actually, they're the guys that haul the water and cut the stuff that needs cutting. And they serve 3 hots and a cot. 100% of the money that they get from those site fees goes directly into the women's group coffers. And they've served well over 100,000 plates of food at this point, at the equivalent of about $1 each. In a country whose average annual income is circa $500, makes a big difference. They don't have to do as much of that other stuff that was inside the park to begin with as they did before. Now there's more places that have recovered tent sites. They've put wells in so they don't have to get their water from the local crocodile-infested lake. And there's lots of other benefits. It's become a real civic community. There's infrastructure there. There's organization. There's communication. There's envy from people who are doing things like this and people who aren't. And it's all going towards the promotion of conservation and the appreciation of what was otherwise taken for granted is just in your backyard. In addition, other groups, we have a sister NGO called the Ankizi Fund, who brings a dental team every year, and the dental team does their own operations there, and within 2 or 3 days, we'll see about 400 people for free dental care. And Earthwatch volunteers aren't certainly conducting any of the dental work, but here you have an Earthwatch volunteer showing the local kids how to brush, because everybody gets a toothbrush. And so that's always great fun. That's another thing that people sort of self-assign to do. But those particular things, for a long time, was all we were concentrating on trying to develop collaboratively with the local people. You've seen these 3 maps before. This is Ankarafonsky in 2011. What you see in this map, which is a change map, like this was a change map, it's this light green, which is forest regeneration. It's working. Another way it's working is there's still this pressure for firewood. All meals are cooked over open fire or charcoal. 99.999% of all meals, even in cities, are cooked with wood or charcoal. And Rado, one of the more than 3 dozen Malagasy students who have come through the project as staff members, developed a design for a Malagasy-specific rocket stove. Now, fuel-efficient cook stoves are not an original idea, but he came up with a way to make them out of locally sourced materials that are free or very, very, very cheap, and a system of training local communities all around the island to build these things and market them. He's tested before and after, and it cuts wood use by about half for the cooking. That's a big deal. It cuts cooking time. The rate limiting factor for all progress in Madagascar is the amount of time it takes to cook rice, because you eat rice, breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3 times a day. And it also, because they're cooking in their one-room houses, cuts down on the pollution in the house, because all of the extra fumes are being burned off in the cooking chamber going up. And Earthwatch volunteers are building these things when they're there in Ankarafonsky. There are multiple sites all around the island where this is going on, and this project is now being supported independently by financing that Earthwatch has arranged via the UK office from the Bennett family. And so it's really taken off like gangbusters and having a significant impact in lowering wood use in the area. You can see here on the upper right the 2 different versions of the rocket stove one. The early one was a little more complicated. The smaller one there that looks sort of like a rook in chess is a lot simpler to make. And in each community where the trainings occur, there's then an economy that's created from the making and selling of these things. So we don't have to be the distribution network for these. So going back to hopefully trying to exacerbate that protection and ability for regeneration for habitats there, goes a step further. You saw in the video the hyacinths. What do hyacinths have to do with Fusa? Not a lot. However, this is the largest body of water for Encarfonska. It's an important storage system for irrigation and everything else, and it gets clogged up. There are many, many species that depend on the lake here for their survival. The Madagascar fish eagle, of which there are probably less than 100 remaining. The ray, a critically endangered freshwater tortoise, calls this home. And it's a good idea to take invasive species out of their environments. Now, the Earthwatch volunteers are not pulling them directly out of the water. Local guys are pulling them out of the water because they know how to look for crocodiles. Earthwatch volunteers don't, so the Earthwatch volunteers have a hard line that they can't get close to the water on. Who's the risk management guy? I need to make eye contact with him. They also find novel ways of getting those clumps closer to the side when they start floating further out. So the local guys feel a little more comfortable with it too. You can see the grappling hook that these guys fabricated there. Now, this is what the hyacinths have to do with Fusa. That wood used to be trees, used to be habitat. You use the hyacinth and also another scrap product that you have even in rural Madagascar in large quantity, which is rice hulls. Remember those rice hulls that they were pounding? Rice is the main staple, so there's a lot of that. Compress them into charcoal. Alleviate the need to continue depending on wood. This is also being sponsored by Earthwatch. Earthwatch volunteers are taking part in these aspects too when they're there with us on a daily basis in the field. I'm going to skip this video right now. If you want to see it tomorrow, I'll be in here and we'll be doing sort of individual vignette half-hour periods. But this is a really cool video about Fusa and another threat they have, which is feral dogs. What you see here in green is the trapping rates for Fusa over the years that we've been trapping. And what you see here in black is the trapping and encounter rates of feral dogs in the same traps. You'll notice in 2004, we saw the first dogs moving into the forest. In 2005, the numbers were skyrocketing. In 2006, Fusa were locally extirpated. They were driven out of these forests where we were working in, and dogs had taken over. Intervention was necessary. There was a very humane euthanasia campaign that we took part in. We still do that when we encounter dogs. We hadn't trapped one all the way until last year when we trapped one. Earthwatch volunteers are aware that this happens. They are not present for any of it. I'm a full disclosure kind of guy. They know that it's going to happen. They know it's not a matter of debate, but it's done by a veterinarian from New York. It's done as humanely as it would be done in a vet clinic here. And these aren't dogs that are anybody's. And it's an unfortunate situation. We've tried everything else we could. We tried relocating them dozens of kilometers away, which was actually just kind of relocating the problem, but making ourselves feel a bit better. They came back in a matter of days. The other thing we do to help stem that is roving spay-neuter clinics. Zuawan is closely involved with the spay-neuter clinics the whole time. Earthwatch volunteers, you see here in the back of the truck, they're not riding in the back of the truck, they're sitting there in the recovery phase with the dog as it's waking up from being neutered. This is actually a couple there, and she was actually a veterinarian, so she said, sure, I'll do this. It was kind of fun. And this was last year. And that's another thing that's going on a day-to-day basis, adding more and more to it. In 2005, one of our radio-collared Fusa, no, 2004, one of our radio-collared Fusa was hit by a car. What? Hit by a car? There's a 17-kilometer stretch of road. This is the national highway that you see here that goes through Encarfonska. I hadn't even thought about the fact that the road might have an impact on the area. So we decided we needed to quantify that. And here's the road itself. You see here in yellow, a 17-kilometer stretch of road. Goes straight through the park, south to north. Guess how many vertebrates a year get hit by cars on that 17-kilometer stretch of road? Give me an approximate number. vertebrates, anything with a backbone. 10,000.
99% frogs.
Mostly, yes, mostly. And so another thing we're doing is every single day doing the roadkill walk, collecting these data, sharing them with people. There are no speed limits, there are no police cars, there are no speeding tickets, there are no radar guns. So the only thing to limit speed is the capacity of the vehicle or physical barriers. So, speed bumps. Park management put in 2 speed bumps after we've been collecting these data for about 3 years. Some of the most fun I've ever had is sitting off the side of the road by a long margin with a beer in the afternoon, watching cars go over these speed bumps and discover them for the first time. That are about this high. It's kind of hard to tell from the picture, but they're about knee high, and they're about this wide from end to end. Great fun. It's amazing how fast information travels in a place with no formal system of information transfer about there being a potential risk there. And those are only 2 speed bumps, but it was a start. And the area between the speed bumps, depending on the taxa you're looking at, cuts the mortality rate, the amount of roadkill, by half to 90%, depending on what you're looking at, instead of outside the speed bumps. Another thing we started trying to do this past year is droning for conservation. Not droning on like I'm doing right now, but flying these drones. If the military can have them, we can too. And so we actually fabricated these things ourselves, and we cut a GoPro cam in the belly and put a GPS self-navigator in it. And we launched them successfully several times until we crashed and destroyed them all. But it was a great learning curve, and got some pretty cool footage, and I'll spend 15, 20 minutes tomorrow talking about that. I think at about 10:30 or so, if people are interested in the droning work that we did there, because the applications of this technology, for a relatively cheap investment, are awesome. And the local people dig them, the kids think they're great, and the volunteers think they're super cool too. So what we've talked about is a lot of the immediate threats and what we're doing to meet them. Taking care of a sustainable alternative for the adult generation that's there. But unless we want to continue doing this in perpetuity, we have to find the long-term solution, which involves education. This is what one of the local schools looked like in the upper left here before the cyclone hit it. To give you an idea of the condition of it here, the guy you see here, he was a kid then, in the green t-shirt there. That's now Dr. Chris Golden, who was a high school kid that came out in 1999, came back multiple years after that as volunteer and staff, finished his PhD over here at Harvard. Finished his undergrad here at Harvard, went to Berkeley for his PhD, and is now back as a postdoc here at Harvard again. And he's the world's leading expert on bushmeat in Madagascar, and has really changed the debate of how health is truly a conservation concern. Because if there is no alternative protein, what do you do? Taking the kids in their own backyards. They previously weren't even allowed to go in the park to see what we're doing and why we're excited about it. And then there was an Earthwatch volunteer in 2001 that came out, a guy named Pete Belaski. You heard me mention him before. Vet from Davie, Florida. He was in his early 60s at the time. And we were doing lots of radio telemetry at the time, and so we had some all-night shifts together. He said, what would the one thing you would do? If you could only do one thing, what would it be? And I said, Pete, build schools. You give people an education, you give them a way out of that never-ending cycle of subsistence agriculture. And Pete went home and he founded an organization called Friends of Madagascar, which has since built finishing 29th school right now throughout Madagascar, serving about 5,000 kids. I was an Earthwatch volunteer that went back and decided he was going to do that. He's still a vet, but he goes back and forth to Madagascar once or twice a year for about a month at a time. And this was Earthwatch volunteers building the first primary school that we actually constructed. There were already some, but a new one in Ankara Fonseca starting in 2011 that was opened and inaugurated this past year. Earthwatch volunteers, and just soup to nuts, everything from the ground up to the completion of the school, being involved there. This is what it looked like when the construction was finished, but the area finishing was not. This is what it looked like in January when we were back with an Earthwatch team and we're distributing school supply boxes to all the village kids. There's 60 kids in that school now, There will be 90 starting in the next academic year, and Earthwatch through the Bennett family has also underwritten, the same guys that are underwriting the rocket stove stuff, the construction of a second primary school, Frank Alfonska, that has deep-seated Earthwatch involvement in this site. I'm going to skip that video too. Here are just a few faces of Earthwatch volunteers and how they have made a difference beyond just the volunteer experience, and I think their lives have been changed by the experience as well. Julie Pomerantz, co-PI, Earthwatch volunteer in 1999, co-PI since '01. Lizzie Boakes, now Dr. Lizzie Boakes, finished her biology DPhil and now works at Zoological Society of London. Harvey Lowe, Earthwatch field rep. Who knows what a field rep is? I can tell who's been here more than 6 years. All right, Harvey Lowe, Earthwatch field rep for New Jersey, has come back several times as a staff photographer. Many of the photos that you've seen here are Harvey's. Pete Velasky, vet from Davie, Florida, founded Friends of Madagascar, which has built or renovated now 29 schools for 5,000 plus kids. Russell Fletcher, Andrew Threadgold, HSBC fellows that came on the project together, underwriting sponsorship for local kids to go to secondary school in Majunga. There is no secondary school until very recently nearby, and it's not too great. And local kids going to high school and now graduating and going into college for a very small investment have been involved, and they've stayed involved that way and maintained their relationships there. And this is the future. Our current cadre of Malagasy master students that are there. I have my first doctoral student, Sam Merson, comes out to Madagascar for the first time this year, and he's at Wild Crew at Oxford. The next generation of host country leaders who have been there and done that, not been born with a silver spoon in their mouth and get a position because of political connections, but because they know the difference, they know what's necessary, because they've been at the face of human-wildlife conflict and biodiversity conservation. That's where we're going to make the longest-term differences, and we're doing it together. This is my next generation. This is my now 4-year-old son, Zachary Danger Dollar. He's coming to the field too. And I just wanted to say, guys, everything that you've seen here would not have happened at all and could not continue to happen were it not for your ongoing commitment and partnership. So I want to thank you. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Well, okay, it's not really a question. You know, Luke, I went on this project in 2009, and I think it's absolutely wonderful what you're doing, both scientifically and what you're doing for the locals. And I just like to let people know, if you give any money to these charities Luke has mentioned, it's going to go right for people, right? It's not going to go for, okay. And you know, I could go on about this. You know, we have so much, and these people have so little. And you realize what a difference it can make.
It's all about field presence. And, you know, that's Earthwatch's legacy.
Yeah.
Is putting people from all walks of life on the ground, not at a regional level, not at a political level, at a human and grassroots level, where the problems come from and where the solutions necessarily have to be implemented. Yeah. And it is at that level that Earthwatch, in its history and in its legacy, has always operated. And that's what sets it apart from any of these other alphabet soup NGOs, in that, you know, there is a direct connection to actually where it's important, not where it's posturable, not where you can have a cocktail party, not where you can, you know, write a piece of legislation which is on paper and makes a great press release, but doesn't actually do anything in the field. Earthwatch works where it matters, and that's what sets Earthwatch apart.
Can I say just one other thing also about the experience of being there? You know, this is, I was there once before, my second time in Anchorage. I went there in 1969 as a graduate student studying lemurs. So exactly 4 years later, I go back to exactly the same patch of forest. And the first time I was alone, I just showed up. They didn't know I was coming. There was no way to communicate. And I remember the forester, John O'Hare, ran a reveal came out of my hut, and here's this white guy getting out of a taxi with all this equipment. He looks at me like that, and I said in my best French, I'm Jonathan Harrington from the U.S. I'm here to study your lemurs. And I stayed there for 6 months alone. And as you know, they now have a little more development. But when I was there, you talk about the trapping. Of course, we weren't doing trapping when I was there because it was rainy season. What we did was walk through the forest every single day, spotting things. And you know, if you do, you could take a 2-hour tour of the rainforest or the forest. You probably won't see very much. Most of the time, nothing happens. But if you're there for 2 weeks, 5 or 8 hours a day, you see things. It's a real experience. You can only get it on an expedition like this. I was older than everybody else. I couldn't do it all. I didn't do the 15-kilometer roadkill walk. I would have been roadkill myself. But it was a great time. I just want to mention one other thing: the party where you brought in a disco. You know, all this equipment. And it was a full moon, and there were white people and brown people dancing together under the full moon
The folklore dance
in a
is still
clearing in
continuing.
the jungle with a
It's the
disco.
last
I mean,
night.
that's another experience you won't get every day.
Well, if you're not going to have fun, you're not going to do field work for a long time. So you got to have some fun.
It was fun.
I had a question. The first thing I look at when I see the Fusa is the tail. In
Yes.
studying its history and habitat and all that, what does the tail have a purpose?
Yeah, it's not prehensile. They can't grab things with it at all. But this animal weighs 20 plus pounds. It can walk through terminal branches of trees no thicker than pencils. And I've seen it happen. And it's throwing this tail back and forth like a tightrope walker has that big pole that it uses to balance itself. And it throws the tail back and forth to help with balance.
So you said that there was an increase of dogs in the area. So when they started to decrease the number of dogs, how long was it until the Fusa came back, or did you
1 year.
have to slow really?
1 year. We were there. We had baseline data. We saw in 1 year the local extirpation event. They were driven out. We saw the dog numbers spike. We were able to talk with park management and act immediately. And the next year, we caught 1 dog and we caught 1 Fusa, which was great progress.
Did you have to introduce them back, like by trap and bring them
No.
back?
They came back. They were just locally removed. They were driven out essentially. And unfortunately, this area was the area that has the most human sort of observation going on in it. And so this was right under management's nose as well. And they probably wouldn't, because nobody ever sees Fusa when you're just walking along. They're incredibly elusive. But luckily, we were able to know from year to year to year what had happened, intervening in this case with management, and we caught 5 Fusa in 2 teams this past year.
When you first started kind of developing this project, what was it like to kind of build inroads with the local community? Were they receptive?
It's great fun. They're great people. Super friendly. Malagasy people are so friendly, smart, involved, super hardworking, but are aware that what they have to do is what they have to do in order to survive. Madagascar is one of the most culturally warm places I've ever been anywhere. There was a year-long political crisis where it ground the entire country to a complete halt between 2002 and 2003, contested over a presidential election in a country then at the time that had 18 million people. Out of political violence, over a year, 100 people died. So that gives you an idea. Had it been on the mainland, it would have been 100 people a second, and it would have been very violent. The one thing Madagascar has definitely taught me, much to my wife's chagrin, but I can spot it now too, which also is to my wife's chagrin, is that instead of aggressive aggression, there's passive aggression. And picking up on that is important.
You've illustrated, well, first of all, thank you for the remark. It was really inspiring.
This wouldn't happen without it. Literally, none of this would exist without it. Zero.
You illustrated a lot of impacts that our work and your work has had in the national park or in the park. What can you point to outside that impacts you've had outside?
Well, the human population density far outside the forested areas is kind of low. The Ankisi Fund, our sister NGO, is mainly driven by paleontologists who like working in areas that are wide open. And so, they've done similar programs for health and education outside of the park. And what's becoming regionally a mindset of awareness, protection, and collaboration, whether it be around paleontological resources or biodiversity-based resources, is beginning to be pretty universal. I was actually just last night at dinner, Zwabina was talking about how she has observed in just the 4 years that she was there, a marked difference in how Malagasy kids who haven't been exposed to a lot of this kind of stuff, they'd see a chameleon, they'd take it, they'd pull it apart, and they'd kill it. And the kids around this area and in the entire region now, don't do that as much. It's just sort of they're like, oh, the Pasas think this is important. I think this is really cool. I understand this. I'm going to put it over here. So little things that matter. Two more? One more? No? Oh, okay.
So it seems like every year you have something different to study or something new. What's the new thing for this year?
Well, we're adding a new school this year. So we've done school stuff before, but we're adding that now. And I think this is a maintenance year, and building the new school is sort of the novel thing, because Earthwatch was involved, volunteers were involved in that in 11, but in 12 it was mainly celebrating its completion and inauguration, doing some painting and stuff. But I think sort of the site identification and groundbreaking and stuff. You saw the one slide of people laying the first bricks and stuff. We're going to be doing that this year that we weren't doing last year. But everything else we're doing, except the droning. We're not doing droning again this year.
Do the volunteers respond differently to that more volunteering type task as opposed to the research?
They're exposed to absolutely everything. They're exposed to all the research stuff within their first day. They're exposed to the rest of it over the next 2 days as that develops out. And they self-select. And I always ask the volunteers, at the end of the team, what did you like? What did you not like? What did you expect? And first day we ask, what do you expect? And also ask them, what did you not expect towards the end? And more often than not, we get the rest of this. The research and the FUSA brought us here, but the rest of it made it a phenomenal, transformative experience. And so they respond to it well. And the nice thing about having them self-select every single day, if they're not into it, they don't have to. They just want to hike, they can hike every time. So that variability really makes a difference, I think, for volunteer experiences. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.